and they put refueling probes on the planes that they had developed in the early 50s and developed air-to-air refueling. So that was a wonderful thing, but the Navy was far behind that. When you put that probe out, it opened a big feathered boom, a feathered, looked like the back end of a rooster out there. And the idea was to take an F-9 with a probe that they stuck out on the side where the pilot could see where the probe was, but he was offset of the center line, and he could look and see the aircraft that was towing it, and he could see the basket, and he could see his probe, and he had to fly up in the turbulence and try to get that probe into the basket. When he got into the basket, he had to plug it and push it 5 feet forward before it locked in. So the learning cycle was, how do I keep the planes that are jogging around and the wind coming off the wings of the plane in front, and how do I get that thing into the basket? So that was a drawback, but that was if an airplane was up and it was in desperate for fuel, it was the last resort to give him some fuel and get him back. So that was part of the training program we had to learn.
Yeah, I'm taking things a little out of context. I'm backing up into when I was a first-class aviation electrician, and I got a letter from my command that Admiral Burke, who was the CNO of the Navy, wanted to hold a symposium of various young sailors all around the globe, and he directed Admiral Fetterman, I believe, to hold a symposium in San Diego. So there was about, I would say, from the Pacific Fleet, there was about 600 of us that were called in, and they broke us up into committees. And the committee that I wound up on, 2 of them, was career and pay. And one of the things that the ad hoc committee wanted to know was, why were we losing all the young sailors that we just sent through all the schools and got out into the fleet? And no sooner did they serve their time in an enlistment, and they would immediately get out, because this is the late 50s and industry is roaring, and they're not happy in the Navy at the time because the technology has, because of transition in the jets and stuff, has got beyond a lot of the sailors that were World War II veterans and everything. And the Navy reduced the number of ships that they had, so they didn't need thousands of gunners mates and thousands of torpedo men and various engineering rates and stuff for the ships, because they got down to, I believe, 200 ships. So what they wanted was highly skilled, sensitive kids coming right out of high school into the Navy schools, technical schools, and stay there. So Admiral Burke, CNO, decided that something had to be done about it, and the chief of naval personnel was directed to hold these seminars to find out what the young group felt like and why they were leaving. Well, as being one of the young group, I was, but that time frame I had already been first class for almost 2 years, And I was studying for chief because I could go up for chief after I had 7 years in. The World War II vets were great guys, but a lot of them didn't have a lot of math. A lot of them didn't understand. The two chiefs I worked for, actually, one of them had to sign his name on a paycheck because he could barely read and write. But the two of them could not understand the technical stuff that we were now faced with. But they would always be the senior guy in the shop or the senior guy in the squadron. They would be the leading chief or the maintenance chief, and it was their job to train the rest of us. And they developed a name for them. They called them Tojo chiefs, because a lot of these chiefs came in the Navy as chiefs. They never came in as the lower ranks and enlisted. And those that were in the lower ranks were all second and first class now because they'd been in 10 years. So it was a feeling like I know a hell of a lot more than the chief does, but he's the boss. So I can go out to industry and I can take my GI Bill and I can do better out there than trying to work for somebody that that doesn't really understand what I do or that can write my reports and stuff. So we discussed that in depth. What could we do about it? And he said, well, number one, we have to figure out some way to get around the seniority. Well, that led right into the second group, which was pay and allowances. Everybody that's an E5 or an E6 in the Navy makes exactly the same pay. Now you have somebody that's got 10 years in, he can't pass the test to get promoted, but he's going to get the same exact pay as some kid that has been through all the schools and has to be in competition with them, and he is going to get 10 points for 10 years of service, and he's going to take an exam which he will maybe fail, but he'll get points for time in rate for the time that he was second class. So he's got a 12 or 14 point advantage to add to his fail grade, and he will get the promotion. But we haven't solved the problem. He doesn't have the technical ability. Even if we send him to the technical school, he can't get through it. So they had to do something about it. The solution was, let's create 2 additional pay grades. We'll create E8 and E9. Prior pay grades went from E1 to E7. E7 was chief. Now, we basically understood that if we gave exams for E8 and E9, Tojo chiefs would not make it, even with their longevity score. So the final, after almost 3 weeks in this symposium and going through all of the rigmarole and talking to the young guys and stuff, the ad hoc committee went back to Congress, talked about it, and the creation of E8 and E9 came into the service. Now, the question came up. Some Tojo chiefs were admirals' aides and everything else. So they got a pass on the test because they were valuable people to the Navy, and they got automatically made E8 or E9. The rest of them had to take an exam, and most of them just went ahead, finished their time in 19 years and 6 months and got out. So you didn't find a lot of World War II chiefs in the Navy by 1959, 60, 62 and stuff. They could go out and get a job as a mailman or in some private little industry or their family. So Congress apparently appropriated the money and agreed E8, E9 came into existence. And then to give special pay to certain sailors, which were the highly skilled technical ones, over those that were good, but run-of-the-mill and not fully trained yet. They came out with P1 and P2, proficiency pay 1 and proficiency 2, and it was by examination. I was fortunate enough, there were 2 of us at Miramar that made P1. P1 meant you got an extra $30 a month. And I passed the exam, there was only 2 of us that did. A year later, you had the option of taking the exam for P2 if you had passed P1. Again, there was only 2 of us at Miramar that made P2, and I was one of them. And at the same time I was taking P2, I was taking the chief's exam. So fortunately, I made P2 and I made chief. I was glad to see that this came into the Navy because now we were getting some of these sailors staying because they knew that they would be able to get special pay. But after a couple of years of having special pay, the morale of those that weren't getting it, that had time in the service, felt like they were being shunned aside. So after about 3 years, they took P2 and P1 away, and we all got the same pay. But it kind of evened out at that point because the young guys were staying. They were getting the schools and stuff, and they were happy, or the enlistments improved. We weren't at war. We were at problems with Russia at the time, but we were not in a shooting war. I have a special letter here from Admiral Burt thanking me for being in the symposium and coming up with some of these ideas and stuff. And I was proud and happy that I was able to pass the P1 and P2. And I didn't mind it going away because that $60 was made up by me making chief. So.